Thank you very much for the introduction. Some technical issues are always happening. Don't worry about it. Just a small note in the beginning. I'm from Austria, not Australia. I always say no kangaroos in Austria, so that's quite the difference. So thank you very much for the introduction, distinguished organizers, Honorable Patricia Kenneth Devine, Dr. Nicoletta Hosho, Mrs. LaDonna Meyer, dear panelists, colleagues, and friends. Immense honor for me to be with you today from the Sultanate of Oman. We are quite advanced in the day here already, so it's my honor to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you around the world. I have prepared a very short presentation for you to go to my topic, which is today the responsibility of protocol and modern diplomacy. And I would like to start with telling you what are the 3 points of my speech. Firstly, I'm going to tell you what is diplomacy, how we came to diplomacy where we are today, how was diplomacy practiced, what are the challenges of diplomacy today, and how could protocol help to tackle these challenges and to solve the problems of diplomacy that diplomacy is without any doubt facing today. It's a little bit a controversial topic, so I'm very looking forward to some questions. As I said, I have prepared a short presentation for you. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you now. And to start with it, I would like to say where we came to diplomacy, where we are today. And this is a development which came across the history of mankind since actually thousands of years. Diplomacy was practiced by different cultures around the world. And some elements of these diplomatic approaches are still found today in protocol. What is quite interesting is that there was a lot said about how to define diplomacy and what is diplomacy today. And we're talking about public diplomacy and digital diplomacy, Twitter diplomacy, and so on and so forth. And I found in a very small book written by a diplomat, Sir Harold Nicholson from Britain in the year 1939, a definition of diplomacy, which is actually still today very, very accurate. And I think it's quite to the point with its terminologies, which is the diplomacy functions is simply to inform, represent, and to negotiate. So a diplomat has these functions to inform, to represent, and to negotiate. And the interesting part is that we see today, when we see or Google the possibilities of public diplomacy, you will find that there is a lot of definitions of public diplomacy around the world and around in the internet. And for example, one definition which I think is quite contradicting this old seeing of diplomacy is that it is any of the various government-sponsored efforts aimed at communication directly with foreign publics to establish a dialogue designed to inform, and this is now the interesting part, and influence with the aim of building support for the state's strategic objectives. So if we see this as an aim of diplomacy, we are quite far away already from the diplomacy functions which we had a couple of years ago, just to inform, represent, and negotiate. But this is actually where we are seeing and how diplomacy was developing through the years. One of the main parts, and I think the main change in diplomacy started with the introduction of social media in the area of the daily political consent. So already in the year 2015, it is now more or less 10 years ago, the political leaders started to use Facebook, the political leaders started to use Twitter, and they started to become present on the social media. And it was in a certain kind of a decline in diplomacy because the efforts of Twitter and Facebook to enter in this area, political ideas, diplomacy had to follow the certain rules that this medium was providing. I'm coming into this in a couple of minutes. The interesting part is that this decline started to get further and further, and actually in the year 2020, we really have to say that mainly in the Western and Central European part of the world, the diplomacy became much more into kind of a diplomacy which is more related to image transportation, which has always been a function of protocol, but now it became much more image coordination in that direction. To the decline of diplomacy, I have to say, I really would like to say that for me, one of the softwares, one of the social media to be blamed is Twitter, because Twitter was one format that really forced the communicator to, in a certain way, diminish the words to 280 characters, which is very much lower than it was before. One interesting part of the social media was, and actually this led to a certain kind of crisis in the diplomacy, was that it was for the first time in history of mankind possible that the leader, the political leader, the political leadership, the president and whoever, had the possibility of direct communication with the public. So that means until that moment, it had always been a certain kind of filtered. So political parties, political leaderships had press departments, which they had today still on. They need well-staged press organized and so on and so forth. But it was not able to directly communicate from one moment to the other to the public. This was completely new in that area. And if you remember the area of the President Trump, when he tweeted at nighttime and on the next day, the spokesperson were commenting or had to face the questions of the journalists what the president was meaning with a certain tweet. So in other words, this was an unfiltered, directly possibility of communication, which has never happened before. The second part, which is quite challenging for diplomacy today, is that image took over most of the content. And I have to say, as Austrian, I have to be a little bit self-critic in this regard, because we had a former Prime Minister, Sebastian Kurz, who was a master in image creating. And I wanted to show this picture where he is with the President Erdogan of Turkey. And the picture was in a certain kind of way produced that Sebastian Kurz was indicating Erdogan in which way the future decision of European Union or Austria dealing with Turkey should work. We have to say that Sebastian Kurz was at this time one of the youngest prime ministers worldwide, and Erdogan was one of the longest serving prime minister presidents of the world. So you had a youngster in the political atmosphere, which the image put on the same level with a very experienced leader. And this was what I would say a characteristic of this area where you were creating image and preferring image over content. The third problem in diplomacy today is language. And this is again the limitation of which Twitter or X today is creating, because we have to speak via a medium which is allowing us solely 280 characters, which is for a diplomat incredibly low and a very low number to communicate at all. And when you are communicating in digital diplomacy with Twitter in 280 characters, you simply cannot express yourself what one would like to say. In other words, diplomatic language on Twitter is actually not possible. This is a factum, and I think this is one of the new developments which we can see since a couple of years solely. Another example is that the language English took very much over the old diplomatic language French, and in French you can talk a lot about a certain subjects which are really tackling a certain subject, where English, especially in Twitter, is much more direct. And that's why actually French was during centuries the language of the diplomats. The fourth point where diplomacy is, in my opinion, in a very strong crisis is as well the certain kind of individualistic approach today built by the social media, that every ambassador, every prime minister is communicating via their social media channels. And actually, this has never been something where a statement is done on an individual basis. Diplomacy has always been, through centuries, a kind of a common statement towards a certain topic, and they were thinking about every word which could have a certain connotation. We were hearing a lot about the importance of small details today, and actually this is unfortunately hindering diplomacy today. The fifth point, meetings are very often reduced to a maximum of 30 minutes, which includes a photo point and a very short statement. At the European Union level, we have very, very short meetings by the high dignities. 30 minutes maximum are not sufficient to develop diplomatic relationships, to develop, foster relationships, to develop good stakeholder management, and actually to build a relationship which diplomacy is all about. The sixth point where I see a crisis in diplomacy is the lack of discreetness and privacy. I wanted to put this picture of the G20 summit of Prime Minister of Canada with the President of China, where certain information was leaked to the press, and actually the President of China was mentioning this in a so-called private talk to the Prime Minister of Canada. And actually even this talk was recorded by a cell phone and put on social media. So that means that this is a lack of discreetness and lack of privacy, which diplomacy is suffering today, caused to the omnipresence of the social media. And this is actually disrupting a lot the process of diplomacy in terms of negotiation. Remember the first principle of diplomacy: negotiation, information, and to represent. And if we put everything in a public space, you hardly can establish, hardly can speak very, very freely. And there are a lot of examples in recent diplomacy where you had exactly this lack of discreetness, which is causing then afterwards a lot of complications. Just think about the summit between the United States of America in Alaska and China, where as well these first minutes of the meeting were directly, transparently published to the world, where China was not very amused by certain statements, and this caused a lot of problems. Yeah? So this is one of the developments of diplomacy that we can observe recently, and I have to say this is actually really challenging diplomacy as rules which have been established over thousands of years, where certain kind of principles are now thrown completely overboard. And I think the consequences of all these kind of turbulences we will see only in a couple of years. And then the last point, which I think as well is quite challenging for diplomacy, is the rapidness and the force of actuality in communication. We are living in no time for a consideration period, and the rapidness of communication is putting the parts of the involvement parties immediately in a certain kind of frame, where from this position they can really hardly get back to another position which could be contradicting the original part. Just think about when the war in the Ukraine started, the European Union leaders immediately started tweeting and condemning and putting themselves on the side of the Ukraine, while other countries started not to communicate at all and had some time to reflect what are the consequences. And before we are doing a statement, they were very conscious about the words they are choosing and not unconsciously twittering whatever they had in mind at this very, very moment. And this is one of the problems that the diplomacy today is facing, actually. How can, and this is now the third part of my speech today, how can protocol now tackle these challenges of modern diplomacy. And I think we can start by thinking that protocol should never, ever become or stop being a political event agency. I think we have to come from the protocol back to a certain kind of rules that have been established in consideration of courtesy and respect through centuries. And I'm talking about when we are becoming in protocol an event agency, we are skipping fundamental aspects of ceremonial and protocol that are very, very much important in the whole political and diplomatic environment. This is, for example, gift exchange, the exchange of gifts, one of the highest elements of protocol, military honors ceremonies, guest book signing, welcome ceremonies, police escorts, road closure, state banquets, cost coverage to a certain format, spouses program, the local etiquette, the dress codes, the red carpet, and so on and so forth. You will see that mostly in the European Union level, most of these ceremonial aspects have been abandoned, and unfortunately, protocol departments have been downgraded to event agencies. The second part is protocol must never underestimate, and Dr. Hoshu said this today as well already, the cross-cultural intelligence. And I think this is one of the elements which is so incredibly important of protocol, because as Ines Pires always had said, protocol is about the others and not about ourselves. So the cross-cultural awareness involves in all rules of protocol that we are respecting the other culture, we are respecting the guests, we want to be good hosts, we want to be good guests. And I think this is only possible if we step in the shoes of the others. And this cross-cultural awareness aspect of protocol professionals is of high importance and should never be underestimated. The third part where I think protocol could and must create or could help actually modern diplomacy is again to create a private room setup and guarantee privacy. I think it is we have to go back to the where diplomacy is lacking, and to create a private, a safe space for diplomacy, for negotiations, and to enable actually the discussions, dialogue, and free communication. This is one of the elements of diplomacy for more than 2000 years, where certain kinds of non-paper agreements, where certain kind of shake hands agreements have been possible without the public knowing about the intent and the consent and the agreement which was done behind the scene. And I think protocol can fantastically play a role in this regard. So in any program where political leaders are meeting, it is very easy to set up a private meeting where actually no cell phones are allowed, no social media courses are allowed, no journalists are allowed. And this is a tete-a-tete for 4 or 6 eyes only. Then again, we should think that diplomacy was never individual. And actually, this is one of the things where protocol could be as well. So solely twittering opinions from individual diplomats is probably not the best idea. And then this was said as well already a couple of times today, and I can only underline this one. One effort should be to educate future diplomats and protocol staff in both diplomacy and in protocol, because both diplomats and the protocol staff should know more or less what are the intents of the others. And for me, in my opinion, protocol has always to be a very neutral part of profession. So we should never become on the service of a certain kind of political leader. And the same is a diplomat. The diplomat is as well on the service of the country and is not doing international politics. This is something which the political leaders are doing. So the diplomats and the protocol staff are coming together. And I think both sides should incorporate in the education both diplomatic aspects and protocol aspects, vice versa. And the sixth point where I think protocol could really help the crisis in diplomacy is that protocol takes back the leadership in the image creation and fulfills the function of representation in a way that protocol is creating images where the elements of protocol are respected, and as well feeding this kind of need of actualization and image creation that the media today needs. I think protocol has already unfortunately lost a lot of this image creation terrain, because this was really taken over by cell phones, and the images of press departments are hardly taken today in newspapers or wherever in social media. But I think one of the parts of protocol should be to go back and create these wonderful images. I'm coming to an end. I would like to show you some very beautiful visits, images, in my opinion, which are recently taken from the region where I am posted at the very moment. These images were taken from a very recent visit of His Majesty the Sultan of Oman to the UAE on a state visit. And as you can see, this is as well what I understand as fantastic, beautiful ceremonial protocol, how it should be. And actually, we can see that all the elements from the very much from the details to the flags to the position of honor and so on, everything was respected to create these wonderful, nice images, which unfortunately we do not see that often anymore in the Western or Central European world. Having said all this, it was hopefully not too much, not too short. I am very much looking forward to a discussion, and thank you very much for your attention. And once again, thank you for having me in this wonderful World Protocol Matters conference.
Dr. Sladko, thank you so much for this presentation. And you really have covered some important parts, things that we don't want to forget about, and that also have emphasized some of the points that were made earlier with the flags. I took a note here. We had a briefing yesterday that talked about technology, and I like your slide there, the crisis in social media, and how we continue to put these new elements, but we should not lose sight of these meaningful details that create this norm, this language that has become part of what protocol is about. And when we start getting away from that, I think it's a dangerous, a slippery slope, if you will, because we lose sight of what we have as protocol and precedence, who goes first and what is said. And, you know, if I have an avatar in the metaverse, and I threaten your avatar, is it a threat? And those kinds of things. So I look forward to more of your research and on that topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I could not agree more. I think this is exactly the point. We can, this is quite a, I think we should not see protocol professionals as event organizers. And I think this is one of the points which is highly important, because protocol, as we heard so much in the forum and in the conference today, is a much more, and Dr. Hosso said this as well, it's a scientific approach. And this multi-scientific approach is a kaleidoscope of different aspects towards the protocol. The problem is, and I think this, Mr. Laban Oserio said this as well, it's very difficult for someone from the outside world to understand protocol, because they do not see the urge and the needs. They just think protocol is about seating arrangements, protocol is about dress codes and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's much more. And I think in the research of Dr. Hosso, she really explained this fantastically, and very nice that this kaleidoscope of different aspects towards what are then the things we see. This is not coming because we like it so much. This is coming from research. This is coming from a long part why we were consideration and back and forward negotiations. And I think this is one of the elements where we should go back to protocol and foster as well these parts and elements of protocol.